AFM Manchester Gloryzone Assembly. Just want to talk to you a little bit about the whole question of vaccination and the number 666 in the book of Revelation chapter 13. May I challenge every one of us who are Bible readers to be people that read the Bible and really read the Bible well, because context helps. The context of the book of Revelation has got to be understood in its apocalyptic nature as in the first century time. So it is a book that has got symbols and images that need decoding, that need interpretation, that need clear understanding. The moment you miss the code, then you will struggle to decode. Now, let's talk about Revelation 13. It has got three figures: the devil or the dragon, the beast from the sea, known as the Roman Empire, and the beast from the land, which is the land of the Israelites, known as the false prophet, trying to influence people to worship the beast of the sea, which was at that time Roman Empire worship. But in the times that we are living in, our interpretation is that the beast of the sea is the Antichrist, and the beast of the land are the false prophets who will try to mislead people to give allegiance to the beast of the sea or to Antichrist. And behind all this is the devil, the dragon, the one who has always wanted to get glory, the one who has always wanted to be worshipped, the one who has always wanted to imitate everything God does. So, what am I saying? The number 666 that is given to people who are supposed to show allegiance as a mark of allegiance and belonging, just like what you find in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 6, the Israelites had to have a mark of belonging, where they had to have a mark on the forehead and on the wrists of their arms. But however, I want you to note this, that what we find in the book of Revelation is an indication of what is going to happen in the last days. And in the last days, the Bible actually speaks of things that will come, like pandemics, like floods, like fires, like tsunamis and earthquakes, and all these things we are seeing, including wars. But the end of the earth is not yet. That's why now the book of Revelation expects you to have wisdom in Revelation 13:8, to have wisdom in understanding all these things. The wisdom that I want to give you today is that the pandemic is a health issue, and therefore we cannot automatically equate it with the beast of the sea and the beast of the earth. We have got to realize that pandemics has been there before and they will be there in the future. And we need to thank God for doctors who have got the wisdom, and we need to leave them with the wisdom to deal with it from a medical point of view. But our Christian belief has always been clear, that we believe in the God who heals, and that this God is the one who actually says in the Bible that, is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no balm in Gilead so that my people may be healed? And in the same way, you find King Hezekiah having ointment of figs applied to his boils, and he gets healed. And we go to Ezekiel 47 and we see God planting trees, or trees getting watered from the temple waters, and these trees produce fruit for food and leaves for medicine. All I'm trying to say there is, it's quite clear that God uses medical specialists to bring healing to us, because they use the medicines, the leaves and everything else to help us to get healed. So come vaccines. Vaccines are not applied onto your wrist. They are not applied onto your forehead, as in the book of Revelation. Therefore, you need to be wise and say, how do I remain true to God and believe in the God who heals, And at the same time, beware that the last days are with us, and we need to always check out. But the most important thing is God is the winner. God is the final authority. The book of Revelation does not exalt the devil, does not exalt the Antichrist, does not exalt the false prophets, because at the end of it all, God is the winner. And that winning process also is shown in Revelation 14, where other people are also marked with the mark of the Lord God. And therefore, our victory is not in the future. Our victory is in the past, because on the cross, Jesus died for us. And Revelation chapter 22, it also says, verse 2, a tree of life grew by the river, and its leaves were used to heal nations. And its leaves were used to heal nations. Isaiah 38, verse 21, prophet Isaiah tells King Hezekiah, who was suffering from boils, and he says to him, make an ointment from figs and apply it on your boils, and you will be healed. And the Bible actually says King Hezekiah went and applied the fig ointment, and he was healed from his boils. And I can go on and on. Jesus says in Matthew 9, verse 12, Jesus said, the healthy people don't need a doctor, but sick people need a doctor. And not only that, the team that went around preaching the gospel with Apostle Paul, the one we read who said, and we lost all hope of surviving in Acts 27, the writer there is Dr. Luke, a medical doctor. We may go on and on and on, but all what we can say is wisdom comes from the Lord. And Jesus grew in wisdom. And in the same way, those God endows with wisdom, they come up with medicines to bring healing to people. Can you imagine how they are able even to use a plant we think is abused most, but it can still be used for medicinal purposes. And finally, even Jesus, when he healed the lepers, because lepers were quarantined from the community because they wanted to stop leprosy spreading in the city, then there was need for somebody to give them a certificate of clearance. Jesus says to the people he prays for, he says, go and show yourselves to the priests. In other words, the priest at that time was responsible for checking whether this person no longer had leprosy. In the same way, we would then say, go and show yourself to the doctor. Now I hand over to the honorable doctor today in the name of Jesus. Over to you, Chiremba.
I'd like to acknowledge the presence of our Reverend Pastor Chipere, and also Pastor Zinyongo, Pastor Gerard, and also some of the pastors on this platform. I also want to welcome family members back home from Zimbabwe, in particular from Rivers of Life, my very own Mzukuru, my Pastor Westerfall. I think she's logged in. Thank you again for all the hard work that you're doing down there, despite the current difficulties. I've got a few declarations to make before we start. On the fly, it says I'm an expert, but I'm not actually an expert, but I'm a doctor. And I believe, sadly, I'm probably, apart from myself and my wife, we are the only doctors in our whole family and also in our Gloryzone family. And I'm praying, I'll be fasting and praying, and I've been doing this for the last 20, 30 years, that I can hand over the reins. I'm tired. Unfortunately, we seem to be failing to recruit and encourage our family members to become doctors. We've got plenty nurses, healthcare assistants, but what we truly need is doctors as well. I would also like to declare that my talks are part of the Kundox Medical Limited, and any proceeds that I may be offered will be channeled back into the Gloryzone building fund, so I don't benefit directly financially. The reason why I've been asked to talk about COVID is because obviously as one of the only doctors in the family, just like anybody else, we have had a very difficult last 18 months, and I don't think there's been any family that has been spared during this difficult time. We've lost family members, we've lost friends, we've lost colleagues, and as a result, I'd like to just take a moment to remember all that have passed due to the COVID pandemic. What I'm going to do today is to try and make sense of the amount of information regarding COVID, and take out hopefully some of the confusions with regards to this deadly disease. Some of the information I'm going to be sharing with you applies to the current UK rules, but I believe it also applies worldwide. I'm going to be touching on the current guidance and the current situation, and then I'll briefly hopefully go through some of the legal requirements. As you are aware that the UK government came up with a roadmap out of lockdown, and there were various steps which I will briefly discuss. I'm going to talk about the current rules in England. I'm going to talk about the current situation with regards to vaccination, particularly our teenagers, those aged 16 and 17. I'll briefly discuss vaccines themselves, the benefits, side effects of the vaccine, and then I'll talk about particularly in our young women and also our older women with regards to the effect of vaccines regarding fertility, pregnancy, breastfeeding, menstrual periods. And then lastly, I'll talk about the long COVID symptoms for those that have suffered COVID. There's something that we call the long COVID symptoms. And then once I've completed that, I will then briefly talk about opening and managing church, as we are now planning to have in-person service. I'll talk about the options of in-person church service versus the virtual sort of hybrid for those that are clinically vulnerable. So in terms of the current guidance, the government took this approach because obviously over the last 18 months, we have had a very difficult time with lockdown. So the government took this step to try and sort of move out of lockdown. And the idea is to try and sort of promote guidance that emphasizes on sort of personal and corporate responsibility of individuals and organizations. So that means that us, Gloryzone as a church, we have to sort of look after each other and protect ourselves, our family, because the responsibility is now no longer down to the government. The responsibility is now down to individuals. So within the church, we believe that everyone is known and loved individually by God, and that as many members within one body, we are all called by God to be responsible to one, to and for one another, respecting the more vulnerable individuals whose suffering is also supposed to be our suffering. I think if you open the book of the 1 Corinthians 12, verse 12 to 27, this is clearly illustrated there. So the move to this sort of step 4 of moving out of the lockdown means that we're being asked to be more, have that personal responsibility around coronavirus than we ever were compelled to be during the restrictions. I mean, the restrictions were necessary. They were very blunt instruments. And obviously, some of you may feel that they were unnecessary, they were overly restrictive. But for others, each easing of those restrictions seemed to bring that additional risk to themselves and to those that they love, especially for those that remain vulnerable. So there's a lot of anxiety in terms of coming out of restrictions. Yes, we welcome coming out of restrictions, but at the same time, there's still that anxiety and uncertainty in terms of what's going to happen. So as a church, as leaders in the church, as the board, these are the people that are best placed to know our community. We know our own congregants. And as a result, we need to look at each and every member of the church and be able to look at their additional risk and do a risk assessment in terms of how best we can be able to assist each and everyone so that they feel comfortable about in-person or whether we should, like what Pastor has just alluded to, still have a hybrid type of service where we've got in-person service as well as Facebook services. So the current situation with regards to the COVID pandemic is that we know definitely that this virus is not gone. It's still there. And this is due to a number of reasons, really. We know that almost 75% of all the adult population in the UK have been vaccinated. But that figure, unfortunately, does not apply to some of back in Africa, in Asia. Vaccination really has not been that great. So which means as long as worldwide, we are a village, you know, we all interact. As long as there's no vaccination worldwide, effective vaccination programs, even though we've been vaccinated in the UK, we still potentially at risk. This virus potentially will mutate and will circulate and will move around. So it's important to be aware of that and to continuously guard and be responsible people that we are. Coming to vaccination itself, we know that vaccines are very effective in limiting what we call symptomatic infections for those that are fully vaccinated. However, they are less so for those that have only received only one injection or none at home. We know medically that unfortunately there's no vaccine that is 100% effective. We know as well that effectively maybe around 10% of those that are fully vaccinated may not mount a robust immune response. And that brings me to what do we intend to achieve by giving vaccines? How do these vaccines work? We know medically that, we have managed to eradicate some of the diseases in the past, for example, polio, mainly due to the fact that we came up with a polio vaccine that was very effective. So in terms of the technology, we are far, far better. We now know how to create vaccines. It no longer takes decades to come up with vaccines. I'm aware that a lot of myths were being sent across via various platforms saying, oh, they have developed these vaccines too quick. I appreciate that. And in fact, it's a bonus, it's a positive in the sense that it all reflects the fact that we are now have got the technology, we can produce things much quicker. So I encourage all those parents that have got children, if they are offered the vaccine, please do take it up because those vaccines are very effective in reducing. The idea of a vaccine is to send a message to your body. It's like your body has got a blueprint. It then allows it to produce or to manufacture a very small fragment of the coronavirus. We call it a spike, really. So when you introduce that to your body, so there's no concerns or these myths that are going around. The idea of the vaccine is to prompt your immune system to kick it into action to produce what we call antibodies. And your white blood cells, they are then capable of fighting this virus. And they can recognize this because you've triggered that immune response. So any future encounter, your body is now aware. It's just like when you learn something, you repeatedly, you read about it. And then when you come across it, your brain just automatically works. It's just like driving a car. You don't have to relearn every time, So this is the idea behind the vaccine. So definitely you can't get the coronavirus just because of the vaccine, okay? The vaccine does not cause you to get the virus, okay? And it has no way, and I repeat, there's no way that this vaccine will affect your own genetic information. So this is a message I want to pass to all members, all church leaders. It doesn't affect you in any way. And this is not the devil trying to manipulate people. So these messengers or particles that we introduce, which is within the virus, the vaccine itself, they're very extremely short-lived, right? They deliver their message and then they get destroyed by the body. And this is why we, for example, I don't know whether you've read about the Pfizer vaccine, it has to be stored in a very particular cold environment because the material within it doesn't last long. It's designed to create a message in the immune system, and then it gets destroyed. So for those that wonder regarding the vaccine itself in terms of its side effects, obviously when you get the vaccine, most of the side effects are very mild, and it's all to do with the fact that your body is reacting, its defenses are being sort of woken up and reacting to the vaccine. And this could include a sore arm, you can feel tired, you may get a bit of a fever, temperature, headache, you may feel a bit sick. I mean, obviously, a small number of people will experience some severe allergic reaction, especially after the Pfizer or Moderna vaccines. But it's always important to, when we do give you these vaccines, that you tell us about any of your sort of non-allergies. But if you look worldwide, the number of severe allergic reactions have been very small. So there is no major concerns with regards to vaccines. It's just like any medication that you take. If you take paracetamol right now, have you ever thought that you may also have a bad reaction to paracetamol, but yet we don't question taking paracetamol? So there is no concerns regard to some of these very small numbers of severe allergic reaction. Ladies, you may wonder, does it affect my periods? Some women have experienced unusual, heavy, painful, prolonged periods after having had the jab. And again, like I said, really, this is extremely, shall I say, it's expected really, because remember, you're introducing something to your body, and this jab will promote an increase in activity in your immune system. And in fact, that means that your body is actually quite healthy. And obviously, this may play a role in terms of affecting your menstrual cycle. This is usually quite short-lived, a couple of months, and then it should be absolutely fine. So again, this should not be a major reason for you not to have the vaccine. What about ladies that are pregnant? What about ladies that are breastfeeding? As an obstetrician myself, in the UK, I've seen COVID in pregnant women, and I can testify that it is extremely bad if a pregnant woman gets coronavirus. Now, thankfully, we've not seen major disasters in my own hospital, but we have seen the effects of the coronavirus in women who are not vaccinated. The evidence is very clear. We've been collecting a lot of data, and we know that having the vaccine is extremely safe in pregnant women and those that are breastfeeding. It protects the woman, it protects their babies. Because what happens is when mom gets the vaccine, mom will produce antibodies that will cross the placenta, which is the afterbirth, and the baby will benefit massively. We have seen women who have not been vaccinated having stillbirths, having miscarriages, because the effects of the coronavirus can be extremely bad in those that have not been vaccinated. So we do encourage women who are pregnant or who are planning to get pregnant to have the vaccine. The vaccine itself does not affect fertility, and I insist, it does not affect fertility, despite contrary myths that have been going along in some of these media. Now, coming to our teenagers, the government, obviously, if you remember, recently have decided correctly that 16 and 17-year-olds should be offered the vaccine. And I think what is important is to appreciate that 16-year-olds in the UK, once you reach the age of 16, you don't need parental consent to be vaccinated, okay? So you need to look at it legally. 16-year-olds don't need, 17-year-olds don't need your consent. However, we do encourage you to have a chat with your daughters, with your sons, with regards to having this vaccine. You can't force them, but you can advise and recommend, okay? And again, like I said, it's extremely safe. Currently, the Pfizer and the Moderna, the Pfizer will be offered to these young people because studies have shown that it is extremely effective. Okay. With regards to, I'm sure you know, for those that have read about consent, that once you turn 16, you become competent. It's called the Gillick competent. This is based on previous legal rulings. So which means that these young people, they are intelligent enough, they are competent enough, and they understand fully and appreciate what is involved. So it's important for a parent. A parent cannot refuse to have their 16, 17-year-old daughter. If they refuse, then unfortunately, this may end up in the courts, who may overrule the parents' decision, especially if these young people are keen to have the vaccine, which as a doctor, we will recommend. I've got a 16-year-old, I will definitely recommend to her to have the vaccine. Now, I'm just going to briefly talk about the current rules in England, and I believe this applies worldwide. So I'm sure you're all aware, from the 16th of August, all fully vaccinated adults will no longer need to self-isolate after contact with a positive case. All right, so I'm really laboring on this because you have to be fully aware, okay? So the same applies to all under 18s, which means, if you remember, you know, there were class bubbles. These will no longer need to isolate as well, even if there is one positive case in their class. So most of these COVID restrictions are being lifted. So for example, since July, social distancing, there will be no limits in how many people can meet. The 1 meter plus guidance was removed. Face coverings no longer required by law, although the government still expects and recommends. So if you look at the wording, this is where I was saying that some of these responsibilities have been devolved down to us as individuals, as church members, as church leaders. The government still expects and recommends that we should wear face masks in crowded and enclosed spaces. Some shops and transport operators may still insist on you wearing masks. Events and gatherings, in particular communal worship, we will not have any more restrictions. So what are we going to do as a church, really? So I'm just going to briefly talk about what these are, my own sort of, through my own reading and research. What are we going to do as a church? What are we going to do as Gloryzone? And these are all my personal feelings. They have not been discussed by the Gloryzone board or the office bearers. My responsibility is to send out that information to them, and then it's up to the church leadership to decide how they are going to conduct in-person church. So the question is, who makes the decision on what happens in church settings? And the responsibility, like I said, really, in terms of making decisions, lies with, in particular, to Gloryzone Church Board, but most importantly, to our Gloryzone Board of Trustees, our BOT, because we are answerable to the BOT. So there is need for the BOT to sit down and look at these regulations and then give recommendations to the church board. And then the church board will then disseminate that information to our congregants. So this is what I can say with regards to decision making. Can we sing and perform in church? If you remember very well, the answer to that since July 19 was yes. Singing and musical performances of all kinds were allowed in churches, including singing, choir, worship. However, some activities do still pose an increased risk of passing on the coronavirus. And this is why it's important for us to do a risk assessment. A risk assessment, I mean, for those that work in the health field, you know how to carry out a risk assessment. Number one, you agree to what activities you're planning. You then consider the hazards, and by that I mean transmission of the COVID-19, hazards arising from using the church building. Are we sharing that church building? What are the activities that are running side by side within that church building? Have we considered how to mitigate that harm and how? And then once you mitigate any of those risks, have you considered each and every member? There are those that are extremely vulnerable. You know that they are no longer required to shield. So that effectively means that as a church, we need to come up with a very clear, precise plan in protecting those individuals as well. So at the end of the day, you're going to need to do a risk assessment. There are various templates that you need to use. You want to assess the risk of aerosol or droplet transmission of the COVID-19 vaccine. You want to look at surface transmission of COVID-19. Do we provide cleaning stations? Do we provide hand sanitizers? Do we sort of try and identify and reduce contacts of people within the church? Are we going to maintain a 1+ meter social distancing whilst in church? Have we considered hygiene in terms of the building itself, hygiene of individuals? Are we going to check temperatures for everybody as they come in? What about visitors? Do we use the NHS track and trace code to identify anybody who is going to be in that building? Although legally, if you again look at the requirements, legally, we are not allowed, or we are not legally permitted to enforce anybody to use the NHS track and trace. What about cleaning the church itself? You know, we are nomads. We rent our building. We're renting our building. It's not our building. What are the regulations of our landlords? Are we the only people who are going to be using that building on that particular day? What are the exposure risks? You know, how big or how small is that building? Is there good aeration that hopefully will reduce the risk of transmission? What about if somebody then tests positive for COVID within 24 hours of attending our service? What are we going to do? So there's a lot of information that is yet uncertain, and as a church and as leaders, we need to sit down and agree in terms of the way forward, so that each and every member of the congregation feels safe, that if they want to attend in person, they are fully protected. So I know that the church leadership, the BOT, will be looking into all these issues, particularly with regards to the church building in terms of cleaning and all that stuff. Lastly, I just want to finish by saying that once the decision has been made in terms of how we're going to conduct the in-person church, it's important that people feel comfortable, feel free to attend or not to attend. I don't think, we will put anybody down for not coming to attend in person. It's a personal decision, it's a family decision. and I think as leaders in the church, our job is to make sure that we cater for all needs and then try and protect each one of us. Okay. So I hope this information has been useful. I know it's a lot to take and there's still a lot of confusion, but and we're hoping that we will make the confusion a little bit less. But as far as I'm concerned, really, with regards to disseminating the information, the danger is still real, is still out there, because the numbers in our hospital in terms of admission, although they are very small compared to the previous first and second wave of the virus, we still get a few individuals who unfortunately are still dying from the coronavirus. And as the sort of ethnic minority people that are extremely vulnerable, it's important that we safely protect each one of us. Thank you again for listening. I'm happy to answer any questions. If I cannot give you the right answer, I will certainly do some research and we'll be able to come back and let you know. Thank you very much, Pastor.
Hello, I have a question for Pastor Chipere. Can you briefly talk about the 666 and why is it coming in to the COVID pandemic and the vaccine?
I think I'll have a Bible study on that because it's a long discussion. Well, the number 666 is basically a number that we find in the book of Revelation, and it is related to the end times or the end of the world, and it is related to specifically the time when there will be suffering of people because of the systems that would be there, which is normally called the Antichrist system. But that number 666 is being misplaced by those who want to associate it with COVID-19, because COVID-19 is basically a disease and a pandemic, and it has nothing to do with number 666. The people who are trying to talk of number 666 are actually connecting the issue with 5G, where they are saying then, as you are taking the virus, as you are taking the vaccine, within the vaccine is probably certain materials that will eventually be metal-like. Like that's why they sometimes bring people with a metal hanging on their shoulder and saying it's because of the vaccine. All those things are simply creations. There is no biblical basis or connection between coronavirus and the number 666. And at the same time, people tend to only read one particular passage. That same passage goes on to talk about God's protection upon his people. And therefore, those who want to emphasize 666 are simply forgetting that the protection of God is upon the believers, even during the end times. It's only that they want to associate end times with the current situation. But that's not the first time. They've always done that before. Whenever there is usually a crisis, people want to quickly associate it with the end times. But that has not been the case. Thank you.